So the first thing I was going to say, and actually today it's been slightly different in how this conversation sometimes goes, but it's been my kind of assessment over the last 20 years that the world has been debating the whole question of climate change and greenhouse gases and all the implications. We've tended to have quite a technocratic dialogue about this based around science and then about technologies and what kind of policies and legislation might actually start to change things. And that's been fantastic, and it's done a great deal of good in moving on the debate and actually changing things in quite practical ways in some places, including in this country with the Climate Change Act. But the more I wrestle with this and the more I look at the ways in which we're not responding, the more I'm convinced that probably the moment has arrived where we need to have less arguments about whether nuclear power or wind power is better and less arguments about whether we need to cut by 80% or 90% and actually starting to get into the nuts and bolts of how you start to change psychology and culture and ultimately people's philosophical outlook. And I'm convinced that the main problem we have now is not an absence of good technologies or policy choices. The basic problem we suffer with is that people don't get it. They don't get it in their heart. They may have heard some numbers, but people are now so disconnected from how the earth works that they're not really able to process the kind of things that are being said to them. And I think the implications of this are quite profound in terms of how we take forward the campaigning and how we try to reach people. And I think it's quite significant, actually, that quite a few people simultaneously seem to have realised this and are taking the campaigning less into the nuts and bolts of arguing about the numbers and more into the cultural space. And I congratulate Climate Week for taking this step, and also the great work that's been done by 1010, of which incidentally I'm chair. And both of these campaigns are trying to move the discussion into a place which is much more resonant with people in terms of how they are as human beings rather than how they are as processors of complicated information. And certainly what we've seen at 1010 in terms of trying to connect to the cultural space is the power of example. And so you just think about the psychology of a fire alarm going off and everybody's just sitting at their desk and carrying on as usual. You know, is this fire real? Do I need to do anything? Whereas if the fire alarm goes, everybody's leaping out of the window and picking up the fire extinguishers. Quite different psychology follows the sound of the alarm. And I think this is what we're doing quite effectively with 1010 at least, in getting people to act in their communities, in their organisations, the places where they have influence, as John was saying, doing it themselves, and then it starts to spread like wildfire, because people see that actually this is not a hopeless, abstract future thing we need to worry about at some point in the future. It's something we can do now, and it's something that actually can bring people together and be a very positive thing rather than a scary and frightening thing that actually you might want to avoid. And connecting with not the usual suspects is quite important in this agenda, we've discovered. And at 1010, you know, we've got people like Tottenham Hotspur cutting their carbon, the British Embassy in China, all sorts of different people making really quite dramatic cuts and finding actually that it's very easy. And then the psychology starts to alter. It's not something you want to push away because you can't do anything about it. It's something you want to own. And then your particular worldview begins to alter as well, we would argue. And this is not to say then that policymakers don't have a role in helping to nurture that kind of shift. And this is not to say that MPs and ministers don't any longer have a central role in all of this. They do. But I think one of the things that they might work on a little more is finding the ways in which the policy choices can connect much better in a positive way with the public. And that's why last week I was very sorry to see the feed-in tariff so drastically reduced as an incentive to install solar panels. And we can have an argument about the pros and cons of the numbers. But actually, that was something that was sending a very powerful signal to people. And I know this very well. I was in Somerset this weekend, met some friends who said, well, everybody's got solar panels locally suddenly. They didn't have them 2 years ago. And now we want some solar panels. And they weren't really sure why they wanted the solar panels, but they thought it was actually quite a good thing. And so that was actually getting into the culture. And we can have an argument about, you know, whether this is subsidising an industry in a way which is not right or not positive. But actually, I think there is something there that goes beyond the details of the numbers of panels and their price and actually is about changing hearts and minds. The other thing policymakers could do, I think, at the moment, I wrote a little blog about this recently, is introduce a GCSE on natural history. So this is not biology, this is natural history, and equipping children with the means to go out and identify butterflies, bird song, different kinds of trees, in order that they can actually start connecting with the natural world. Because while we're using these abstract, for some people, abstract terms about climate change, actually this is about the earth and what we're doing to the earth. And if you don't understand the earth, you can't really have much of an idea about what needs to change. So again, that's a very simple thing, getting children out into the environment and helping to equip them with not only knowledge, but also feelings about what this means. Final point on where policy can connect with all of this. I think the challenge right now in the recession and everything else is to find ways in which action on climate change makes economic and social sense. And we're still having an environmental argument about this, and that's fine, but it's not the place to be talking at the moment in terms of how we bring people with this. And I think we need to hear ministers talking much more about jobs and good quality jobs in emerging industries that are the future of this country, both domestically and in terms of how we're going to be building a presence in export markets. And I'm just simply not hearing that. And what I am hearing is that actually, as John was saying, you know, the environment is something for later because we've got an economic crisis now on our doorstep, and the discourse needs to connect much more with where people are at. They're worried about their jobs, and seeing investment into green technologies and green energy, which is going to create jobs, I think would have instant political appeal and would ramp up the support we have for all of this. Just on a final personal note, I was down at the Thames Array last week. I was very pleased to be taken out by the project director on a boat out into the outer Thames estuary to watch the installation of 175 3.6 megawatt wind turbines. 500 people are going to be employed out there in really high quality, really exciting, very challenging jobs. And I think if you put that to young people as a choice as to what they want to do for their future, compared to selling insurance in the City of London, I think I know which would get political backing.